Greetings. Today I'd like to talk about interpersonal conflict. And interpersonal conflict is going to be one of the most important components of interpersonal communication. Interpersonal conflict is part of all of our interpersonal relationships and interpersonal communication, and it doesn't even matter what the context is. So before we continue, I'd like to ask you, what image does conflict conjure up? Does it conjure up to parents fighting at the dinner table? Does it conjure up you asking your boss for a raise? Does it conjure up images of you and your sibling having a knockdown, throwdown, door slamming argument over who gets to use the car? All of these are types of interpersonal conflict. So one of the first things I'd like to do is to go ahead and define interpersonal conflict as it is defined in your textbook, just so that we have it out there. So interpersonal conflict is a disagreement between or among interdependent individuals that simply means that what one person does impacts the other. Okay. Conflict occurs when people are interdependent then, when they are mutually aware of incompatible goals, and that they perceive each other as interfering with their own goals. So one way that we could think about this is that when you're at work, and we'll say that you're at an advertising agency or something like that, and you're working in a team, as most advertising agencies have their employees do. Your team needs $5,000 in order to complete the campaign for Crest. Well, another team within your organization also needs $5,000 to complete their campaign on Speed Stick. All right. At this time, there's only one pot of $5,000, and both you and the other team know this. You both need the exact same resources in order to complete your work. You're going to be engaged in some type of conflict, okay? Because there is a limited amount of resources. You both need them. You both need them for equally important reasons, okay? And that's going to create some conflict. So one of the first things I would like to do then is to go ahead and talk about some myths about conflict. First, one of the first myth that your book is going to talk about is that conflict is best avoided. All right, that is not the case. Conflict should be, approached. It should be you should try to solve it if possible. Okay. Conflict means that a relationship is in trouble. That is also false. All relationships have conflict. We have different levels of conflict. We have different amounts of conflict. We have conflict over different things. But we work out problems. We solve problems through conflict. Conflict damages interpersonal relationships. Conflict does not necessarily have to damage interpersonal relationships. As you're going to be finding out, conflict can be either negative or positive. Okay. And the problem that we have, that most of us have with conflict, is that we see it as negative, and so we don't know how to manage it effectively. The next myth about conflict is that conflict reveals negative selves. It can reveal negative selves, but not always. It doesn't have to reveal the negativity of ourselves or our bad characteristics, as you will. Again, if we know how to better manage conflict, we can still have a positive image of ourselves. And conflict has to have a winner and a loser. That is not always the case. Sometimes we both can win, sometimes we both lose, sometimes we have a win-lose kind of situation. So there's lots of different ways in which we can manage conflict. Okay? So some principles of conflict that I would like you to think about. Conflict is, in fact, inevitable. There's always going to be conflict. Conflict can center on content and relationship issues. Okay, so conflict can actually be about kind of an external thing, all right, or external forces that are always there, or it can be about the relationship that we have together. Conflict can occur in all communication forms, which is correct. Conflict can be negative or positive, which I've already said. Conflict is influenced by culture and gender. That is also correct, and I would invite you to kind of think about that a little bit in terms of, well, first of all, we know that compared to many other cultures, American cultures do have a tendency to engage in quite a bit of conflict, and it's because we are, in fact, argumentative, right? And we are a very individualistic society, and so we have been taught to, put our ideas out there, put our opinions out there, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that is just different. Same thing, we have different views in terms of gender when it comes to conflict, when it's okay to engage in conflict and how we engage in conflict. And then we also need to realize that conflict styles and conflict itself are going to have some consequences. They can be negative, they can be positive, but it's going to depend upon what your outcome is, what your goals are going to be. So I do want to take a minute and look at some of the stages of conflict management. All right, so this is the conflict management stages that's in your textbook. And so the first thing you're going to see is that you need to first define the conflict. All right, so when you're defining the conflict, you need to define both the content and relationship issues within the conflict. Most conflicts, it's not just going to be about content, it's not just going to be about relationships, it's going to be a mixture of the two. So when it's time for your year-end review from your boss, you're going to have to separate out, well, my boss isn't offering me a big enough raise because he or she is saying that I'm doing these things wrong, but in fact my boss has only been here for a year, so they don't know what they're talking about, right? There's going to be different aspects of both content and relationship issues within that. So you need to first define the conflict, okay? Make sure that when you're defining conflict, you're being specific, you're being as objective as possible, you're trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes, you're not bringing in a bunch of relationship baggage to this, okay? So you need to try to remain focused. Step 2 has to do with examining possible solutions. What are the possible ways in which you can resolve the conflict? Come up with as many as possible. All right. Try to find solutions that are win-win solutions. Try to find solutions where cost and rewards are equally shared, okay, for both sides of the conflict. Once you have gone through and created as many possible solutions as possible, pick the one that seems to be the best one for both sides. Go ahead, test that solution. So it's okay, we're going to do this. I'm thinking about this. Do I feel like if this is a good solution, will I be able to be okay with it? And then go ahead and actually test it out. Do a test run. Okay, we'll try this for a month. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so you give it a fair chance. Once you have kind of tested out the solution, you need to evaluate the solution. Did it achieve both your goals and your partner's goals? And your book is going to tell you to use De Bono's 6 thinking hats, which you can go ahead and look at on your own, but this is a good way in terms of looking at this from all sides. And then finally, you're going to either accept or reject the solution. If you accept the solution, if both of you accept the solution, then you're done with this. You're done with this kind of process for now. If you reject the solution, you're going to have to go back up to one of the previous stages. Usually, you start over. You might go back to defining the conflict, or you might go back to where you created a bunch of different solutions, and you pick a different solution and you test it out, and you keep going until you find the correct solution. Okay, so those are some different ways in which you can manage conflict, okay, or in which ways you can work through conflict. So some of the things I would tell you to kind of remember that conflict is not always negative. Conflict is positive. This is how we come up with ideas, how we come up with solutions. This is how we come up with new and innovative ideas as well. You need to be aware of how you generally manage conflict. There's lots of different ways of managing conflict. Your book is going to talk about competing, it's going to talk about avoiding, it's going to talk about accommodating, collaborating, and compromising. Now, as Americans, many of us are very kind of competitive, and this is the I win, you lose. We will continue in a conflict, we will continue in an argument, even if we know we're wrong, because it's all about winning. This is not always the best case scenario for us. Many of us fear conflict at all costs, right? We try to avoid it as much as we can, and so this has a lose-lose outcome. Some of us are, again, kind of fear conflict, and so we try to accommodate, and this is where, I lose, you win. We're doing this to maintain the peace. Now, accommodating is not always bad. If there is a particular issue that is important to you but not important to me, perhaps I decide I will go ahead and accommodate you now, because later on, when something is important to me, this will help me in bargaining for my position later on. Collaborating is a win-win situation. We have a tendency to value collaboration, and then also the last one, compromise, here in the United States, though they are very, very hard and they take a lot of work. So when we collaborate, this is when we are working together so that both sides get what they want. If we're talking about compromising, when we compromise, I have to give up something, you have to give up something, which means I get something, I win something, and you win something. All right, and so those are kind of some of the common ways in which we work through conflict. But to figure out your own kind of conflict management style, you need to figure out how you engage in conflict most. All right, now we don't always do it the same way every time, but again, you can probably figure out, it's like, well, am I a very competitive person? Do I avoid it because conflict scares me? All right, and again, we usually work towards collaborating or compromising. Okay, those become the two harder versions. When it comes to conflict, we have to remember, don't be personal. Try to empathize with the other person. Try to understand where they're coming from. Right? So this, in a nutshell, is some of the basics about conflict. This final chapter in our textbook is very interesting. It'll be very useful for your personal life as well as your social life and your career life. Okay, so I do urge you to take some time and read through this, and while you're reading through it, figure out where you fall within the textbook when they're talking about how people manage conflict and how you feel about conflict.